Look, it is, for young people, it is the second highest rate of death for young, and it's more common for young men to commit suicide. There are a range of factors there, so it depends on what age group you're looking at. So there's the sort of 15 to 19 and then, slightly older. And there's also different rates for attempted suicide. So the most common rates of suicide in Australia are actually in older people. However, youth suicide has a particular impact, I think. The most common rate of suicide in Australia is actually men aged 85 plus. You can see the difference that suicide of an 86-year-old man might have compared to the death of a 19-year-old, for instance. So I think that's probably something to be considered too. It's not just the rate of suicide amongst younger people or older people, but the impact it has on a broader community.
I knew Jessie for just over 3 years.
I knew Jessie for 2 years.
I knew Jessie for about 3 years.
I knew Jessie for 2 to 3 years as we worked as bartenders at Cloud9. That was where I first met Jessie.
We met at a friend's house. I was going over to visit a friend and he was there. We just sort of clicked from when I went there.
I first met Jessie at Cloud9. He was a student of mine.
I met him at Cloud9 Bar when he was doing his hospitality course with my husband George.
How would I describe Jessie in 3 words? A freaking nightmare. No, probably fun, loyal, annoying.
He was outgoing, he was funny, and he was caring.
Jessie was courageous, loyal, and really, really funny.
He was enthusiastic, determined, and an all-round funny person.
I have to say, my favourite memory would have been, we were at a cocktail competition with my husband George, and he was so excited when George won it, and he was just crying, and it was just the most beautiful moment just to see him so emotional and so proud.
My favourite memory was, I guess, just watching how much he'd improved his life and how good he was doing everything that he did.
I have a lot of favourite memories of Jessie, but one that really stands out is laying on the lounge room floor listening to Mark Wilkinson just talking about random stuff that, I don't know, Mark Wilkinson comes and plays in Australia sometimes. He travels around and we go see him, and when he's playing I can just hear the conversations that we were talking about from like 2 years ago. So.
We were at a cocktail competition in Melbourne watching George, Jessie's mentor, compete, and when it was announced that George had won the competition, Jessie was overwhelmed and he started crying, and we're having a great time, but that was probably my highlight.
My proudest moment of Jess would have been when Jaden was born, but there was another time when McKillop Family Services had asked him to do a speech, and he asked me to go with him for support. So I went along with him, and we didn't know what really to expect. It was at Beeves Bar. We got there and there was about 100 people there, and he didn't know what to do. He was quite nervous, and his time come up to speak, and he got up the front and you could see him shaking from the back row, and he started speaking, and a lot of the carers knew him, so they knew the stuff that he'd been through, and as he was speaking you could tell his confidence kept getting higher and higher. As he was saying things that he'd done throughout his life, everybody in the crowd was cheering him on, and his smile got bigger, his voice got louder, and then as he kept going, he had pretty much everyone in the room in tears, and it was just beautiful to see that he's seen how proud everybody was of him, and he just, it was good. That was a good moment, and I was really happy I could be there with him to share that.
He was great to work with, always making the customers laugh and trying out all of his new cocktail inventions, telling us all about his boxing stories. He was always a funny guy. Everyone loved Jessie.
I had lots of proud moments of Jessie. One particularly, I'd say I was watching him work one night and I went out the back and told him just how much he'd grown and how proud I was of him, to see him just sort of blossom into this really amazing person and, you know, get away from that tough life that he grew up with.
My proudest moment of Jesse was once again just watching how he'd turned into a man and how, you know, he was doing really well for himself.
I cut his hair a couple of days before, or a few days before it actually happened, and we were talking about his new adventure. He just got a job with his coffee work again, and yeah, he was really excited.
Look, there are a range of warning signs that we know exist for people who are contemplating suicide. Clearly there are some people who will tell someone that they can't go on, sending messages. Young people will often send text messages to friends or other messages saying, you know, goodbye, I can't go on. When people start to give up, you know, become disassociated from family and friends, they can start to give away belongings, you know, precious belongings, not making plans for the future. Those sorts of things can be warning signs. We know that people who have a pre-existing mental health issue can be more at risk of suicide and suicidal thoughts. So that's why we, you know, in working with those groups, we tend to keep a bit of a check on those sorts of things. We need to keep an eye on people who are particularly vulnerable.
I was in bed and I'd had a missed call from his partner, and it was a really hard time.
I was at home in bed when I heard about Jesse's death.
It was a complete shock. I did not see it coming at all.
I think suicide's always a shock, but there was a couple of signs, but I never really thought too much into them. It's only sitting back now, realising that he was crying out for help, but he wasn't really showing it. He didn't ask for help. He was a bit too headstrong for that. So yeah, it was a shock, but there were lead-up signs that, yeah.
I didn't really see any signs that led up to Jesse's suicide, so I was definitely in massive shock.
It was a shock because I knew he had it hard. But, you know, I think it was, just something that he was such a spur of the moment person, and it was just a split decision that he didn't think about.
I honestly haven't really thought too much into how I'm going to talk to Jaden until he gets a bit older and he's old enough to know what really happened then.
I would tell Jesse, you know, was it worth it? It was just a waste. I just wonder whether he would make that same decision again.
Just don't make those split decisions, and think about it. You have children, your family, and all the people that love you. So much more to live for.
I really don't know what I would say to somebody in that position, because I've never been in that position myself. I've thought about stuff like that, but I've never really been in that position. So I can't sit there and say that it's selfish.
What I would say to somebody contemplating suicide would be, is consider what you're doing. It's really not worth it. Think of the big picture. Think about everybody that loves you and everyone that you leave behind. You know, tough times do eventually go away. It's just a waste. Don't do it.
Stop and think. Try and find help. Try and speak to someone. You have to be strong and brave. It's tough right now, but things will always get better.
I would tell them just to think about it. It's such a massive decision to make, and it's so final, and there's so much more to live for than just feeling like that at that moment.
Dada. 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 Dada.
Dada?